lack of relevance or whether that is germane to this argument in terms of whether they're a better writer or not, we are slowly coming to accept that certain writers are not going to have the same effect on readers that they had 20, 40, 60 years ago, because they're simply not being taught, and our interactions with them are far more unlikely to happen. So, you know, my image of Kipling's reputation being stamped on forever is almost self-fulfilling, because there won't be another generation there left to find it. I went through an Orwell phase, you went through an Orwell phase. How many people at the age of 14 are going to go through a Kipling phase? It seems unlikely.
Racism and revenge.
Nothing. No, I was astonished at how sympathetic Kipling is towards Islam, for instance. He's a great defender of Muslim culture at a time when he was actually running down Hindu culture. And again, it's a question of ignorance and knowledge. He knew an awful lot about Muslim culture and damn all about Hindu culture. So he's incredibly good about Bengalis and incredibly polite about strong men from the Northwest frontier. And I think his ignorance betrays himself time and time again in that respect. But be fair to him, I don't see him as an out-and-out racist.
I would say, as usual, it's complicated. I mean, I think, you know, Kipling had sort of everything politically invested in the notion of hierarchy. But there was this side of him which has tremendous imaginative sympathy for people that sort of politically he very much feels are in second place. I mean, his anti-Semitism can be attested, and it's sort of very much to the fore in some of his stories, like his Private Honour. But he creates a very, very sympathetic Jew in the Puck story, The Treasure and the Law, who turns out to be responsible for helping to ensure Magna Carta. Similarly with racism, you know, against these sort of gross instances with Barrow ballads, you can set the bit in Kim when the narrow-minded missionary sees the Lama comes in, he's a sort of holy man, and Kipling says, quote unquote, Bennett looked at him with the triple-ringed uninterest of the religion that calls 9/10 of the word heathen. That's sharp.
Okay, look, I'm going to take, because we're into the last few minutes, I'm going to take just a final round, if anyone's got some final points, then literally one sentence pitches from our panellists, for and against. Who wants to come in and just, yes, right at the back. We'll come to you at the back in just a second.
Obviously, Orwell was writing at a point when there was a sea change in culture in terms of Indian independence. It was sort of on the horizon, and it was vogue to be anti-imperialist in a way, especially if you were liberal. And I wondered if some of his attacks on Kipling may be fueled by the fact that Kipling was the poster boy for imperialism in many ways. In Coming Up for Air, when George Bull describes that Anglo-imperial house as being dusty and like worn down, it was a commentary on the fact that society was changing and going away from that imperialist sort of history. And Orwell was very aware of that and sort of fed off that in a way.
Thanks very much. And the gentleman on the back, towards the back of the left there. Thank you.
Just the comment from Charles Allen about the bits of India, the kinds of Indians that Kipling liked, reminded me that none of you have talked about your writer's views or ability to understand the position of women.
Okay. Did I see a hand on the right as well? Or any remaining hands I've not seen? There's one down the front here, lady at the front.
Thank you. I think really, for me, it's a generational thing. Those of us brought up during or after the war, Kipling was always there. Parents handed it down. The book was always in the bookcase. I don't know which of my hands I could put up when you call for a vote at the end of this morning, because, like Stuart, I think that children in the future probably won't have access to either of the writers in a certain level of education. It's very sad.
I'm sure I'm not going to allow don't knows, by the way, so have I missed any other hands before we just...
There's one upstairs.
Okay, can you go up and... Thank you.
I was not brought up as a child with Kipling. I was brought up with Enid Blyton. I came here as an Orwell fan. I go out as an Orwell fan as much as I would have done had this debate been between Orwell and Enid Blyton.
That, as they say, is probably the note on which we should conclude our proceedings. Apart from these one-sentence pitches at the end, I'm in the same order we started with, John.
This is the final summary, is it?
This is your last chance.
Just thinking about women. Yeah, part of it, Rudyard Kipling's dislike of the Indian intellectual, the Indian politician, was he writes several poems indeed about saying, you can have a vote when you start treating your women properly, as an aside. To me, the summary about, I think Kipling an awful lot of damage. And he says anti-authority, so I'm pro-authority. Let me remind you of the two greatest lines that Kipling ever wrote. 1918. If any question why we died, tell them because our fathers loved. That is not pro-authority.
Thank you. Stuart?
I would say that when you mentioned about that one piece could be written about both Kipling, as you introduced, one piece could be written about Kipling or Orwell. While I say the point, I really don't see it. As far as I'm concerned, in the second half of the 20th century, the only British writer, well, in fact, the whole of the 20th century, one English writer who really, really understands the works of the imagination and the works of reality and fuses them together to create not only a complete identity for a nation, but also something that goes beyond that, so that the entire world understands. And that's Orwell. And Orwell gets that, and that's why he's the best.
Thank you.
Well, to me, as I said, in terms of imaginative genius, Orwell went hands down. I also want to pick up a question of gender politics. I think, frankly, the program is really done. Kipling was an anti-feminist. On the other hand, he had a great imaginative sympathy with women, and I could really offer a list of his stories. I contrast him with the man who wrote of Conrad that one instance of what a fine writer he is that William mostly disliked his books. I rest my case.
One sentence on race, to abuse my position here. I think that Orwell made rather more of an effort to overcome the prejudice of his age. Certainly after his experience in India, he comes back very definitely as an opponent of the colour bar and writes very effectively against all that in his columns during the 1940s. When it comes down to another little prejudice, anti-Semitism, however, I think there's evidence that he grappled with it. It was something that was still very much in the back of his mind throughout his life. Very interesting chapter on that in David Taylor's biography of Orwell that was published about 10 years ago, called Orwell and the Jews. But that's a footnote, really. My final sentence is much more simple. If I'm advising someone on how to write today, I'll recommend that they read Orwell. I won't recommend that they read Kipling.
Okay, now this is the vote you don't want. Whatever criteria you want to apply, I want to know, just broad show of hands, not going to count, I'm not going to publish it, who is in the sort of camp of Orwell and who is in the camp of Kipling. Let's have who's in the camp of Kipling first. Okay. And who's in the camp of Orwell? Well, it has to be said, there was a decent showing. There was a decent showing for Kipling, but there was an overwhelming showing for Orwell. Can I just ask one more question? Has anyone moved from one camp to another during the course of these proceedings? Golly, well that's good. I'm not going to go ask you, I haven't got time, but that's good. There's at least, that's good. Probably a dozen people who have shifted. So that's a tribute to our speakers.
And you haven't asked me to move in it like
Okay. I think we've had a splendid splendid and spirited debate, a debate which makes you want to go and read more of both of these people. And I just offer perhaps one thought at the end. Kipling lived to be a decently old man. Orwell didn't. Orwell died when he was 46. And it's just worth reflecting on the fact that how do you live to be a decently old man? How do you live to a Kipling sort of age? He would still have been around writing about Mrs. Thatcher. And I suspect that it's quite a deprivation for us that, that he wasn't. Could I, on your behalf, thank these splendid people?
Chairing it masterfully, and to you. I would also like to say that Charles, Jan, and Stuart have all got copies of their books outside,
and mine,
and will willingly sign them just to add to the toppling piles of books that we probably already have in the middle of this literary festival. So, thank you again.